It's minutes past the hour 10 in Banjul, and this is the news coming to you live from the Gambia Radio and Television Services with me, Aissatou Keita. In the headlines, President Adam Barrow reshuffles his cabinet, appointing former Higher Education Minister Badara Diouf as Vice President, replacing Dr. Aissatou Toure. A move to contain malaria in the Gambia as the Minister of Health prepares to distribute 2 million bed nets across the country, commencing May 8th. Reporters Without Borders hail Gambia's considerable progress in press freedom following the launch of a new media outlets by President Adama Barrow. This as the country marks World Press Freedom Day. Plus, thousands of people line up the streets in the U.S. to protest against the Supreme Court's ruling to overturn abortion rights. An European Union chief calls for Russia all ban in fresh round of sanctions. This as the Russia invasion of Ukraine intensifies. This and much more coming ahead in this edition of the news. Do stay with us. Apologize for the late start of the news due to some technical problems but we begin this bulletin with the news of the cabinet reshuffle by His Excellency President Adama Barrow following the December 2021 presidential election and the National Assembly elections in April. His Excellency the President of the Republic of the Gambia, Adama Barrow, has constituted a new cabinet to run the affairs of the state. The changes include the restructuring of several key ministries. For a complete list of the changes, here is the government spokesperson, Mr. Ibrahim G. Sankare. While spokesperson government of the Gambia, Mr. Ibrahim G. Sankare there, well, I guess we couldn't get sound proper from that audio due to some problems. Now we move on to a move to contain malaria. The Minister of Health is set for massive distribution of 2 million bed nets across the country. The cross-border initiative in partnership with the Senegalese Ministry of Health is commencing on the 8th of May, coming after the commemoration of World Malaria Day on April 25th. Meanwhile, GRTS has been examining the government's stance in the fight against the disease. Alajimbai has the details.
Impact on the health and livelihood of people around the world. Over the last couple of years, according to the WHO, malaria has caused over 500,000 deaths, more than 2/3 in children under the age of 5 in African countries. The manager of the National Malaria Control Program, Balakande, spoke about the commemoration of World Malaria Day.
Last week, on the 25th of April, World Malaria Day was commemorated by all the African countries, of course, throughout the world as well. The objective was like in 2000, African head of states met in Abuja to, where they committed themselves to reducing the malaria burden by half by 2050, and also making sure that malaria is also reduced to a very minimum level. In order to honor those commitments and also to remind the African leaders of their commitment, that is why World Malaria Day is commemorated once every year, and in addition also to raise awareness, so that people will know actually malaria still exists, malaria is a threat, and everybody has a role in malaria control and in the fight against malaria.
Despite the high prevalence and death rates of malaria across the African continent, The Gambia, according to Mr. Kande, has made significant gains in reducing malaria infections.
So I'm very, very happy to tell you or to tell the general public that malaria has been really reduced very significantly over the years. Let's say from 2010, the malaria prevalence was only 4%. Then in 2017, into 2014, sorry, it was reduced to 0.1%, 0.2%. But now, most recently in 2017, the prevalence of malaria is 0.1%. So you can see over the years, we really have been reducing the burden of malaria and also the prevalence of malaria over the years.
The Ministry of Health, through the National Malaria Control Program, has developed initiatives to reach people at risk of malaria with the services they need. Mr. Kande explains.
What we have been doing over the years and what we will continue to do is distribution of bed nets. We've been distributing bed nets, in the health facilities and even at community level, free of charge. On the 8th of May, this Sunday that is coming, we're going to launch a bed net distribution campaign. It's going to be launched in Amdalai, jointly together with Senegal, because we intend to distribute over 2 million bed nets. In addition, we've been also giving children under 5 administering SMC drugs in order to prevent malaria complications. In addition to that, we are also spraying houses, especially in URR and CRR, to reduce the malaria burden and also the density of mosquitoes or the population of mosquitoes. Also, we have been giving, there are effective and efficient drugs that are available in all health facilities. And we also have to make sure, RDTs, that is for malaria diagnosis, to test whether somebody has malaria. So we have all these things, all those facilities available at community level and even at facility level.
Kande thanked government and its partners for providing the resources required in the fight against malaria. He, however, warned that there is no room for complacency. Alhaji Mbai, GRTS News.
Well, back to our earlier mentioned story of the cabinet reshuffle by His Excellency President Adama Barrow. Let's take a listen.
Subsection 3 and Section 71, Subsection 3 of the Constitution of the Republic of the Gambia, is pleased to make the following appointments to his cabinet with effect from Wednesday, 4th of May, 2022. 1. Vice President, Mr. Aliu Badara Juf. 2. Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Mr. Dauda A. Jallo. 3. Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, and Gambians Abroad, Dr. Mamadou Tangara. 4. Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, Mr. Sidi Keta. 5. Minister of Defense, Mr. Serigne Modu Njai. 6. Minister of Interior, Mr. Siaka Sonko. 7. Minister of Tourism and Culture, Mr. Hamad Ngany Kumba Ba. 8. Minister of Lands, Regional Government and Religious Affairs, Mr. Abba Sanya. 9. Minister of Agriculture, Dr. Demba Sabali. 10. Minister of Transport, Works and Infrastructure, Mr. Ibrahima Silla. 11th, Minister of Health, Dr. Amadou Lamin Samate. 12th, Minister of Basic and Secondary Education, Mrs. Claudiana Cole. 13. Minister of Gender, Children and Social Welfare, Mrs. Fatou Kinte. 14. Minister of Petroleum and Energy, Mr. Abdoulaye Diop. 15. Minister of Fisheries and Water Resources, Mr. Musa S. Drame. 16. Minister of Higher Education, Research, Science and Technology, Professor Pierre Gomez. 17. Minister of Environment, Climate Change and Natural Resources, Mrs. Rohi John Manjang. 18. Minister of Youth and Sports, Mr. Bakari Baji. Honorable Sidi Keta will continue to oversee the Ministry of Trade, Industry, Regional Integration and Employment until the formalization of the appointment of the new minister designate, or of the minister designate. His Excellency, the President, acting under Section 71, Subsection 1 of the Constitution, has created a new ministerial portfolio in charge of the public service, administrative reform, policy coordination and delivery. The new Minister of the Public Service, Administrative Reform, Policy Coordination and Delivery will have general oversight over the public service and shall work towards the formulation of policy geared towards institutionalizing a culture of discipline, excellence, and accountability in the public service. Furthermore, the new minister shall continuously review the inner workings of the administrative machinery of the government and make proposals for reform to reduce inefficiency and increase output. Finally, the minister shall be in charge or shall be charged with developing frameworks for monitoring the implementation of government policy and for ensuring effective communication and horizontal coordination between ministries.
While government spokesperson Ibrahim Sankare there. And now over to a press release, and it reads, the Gambia Armed Forces informs the public that it will conduct live firing exercise for GAF recruit intake 37 from Thursday 5th to Saturday 7th of May at the Tintinba shooting range in Foni, West Coast region. The public, especially residents of Tintinba, Burok, Kanfemda, Kanilai, Sangajor and Buyam are urged not to panic but cautioned to avoid the designated shooting and training area during this period. Meanwhile, GAF solicits your usual cooperation. The release ends. Meanwhile, a quick reaction force of the Gambia Armed Forces recently visited border communities along the Gambia-Casamance border to give confidence to Gambian communities in the area in the midst of conflict between the Senegalese soldiers and the MFDC separatists in Casamance. The exercise dubbed Confidence and Assurance Patrol was also designed to assess the security situation along the border. Alhaji Mbai has the details.
The Gambia Armed Forces over the weekend visited several communities along the border between the Gambia and the southern Senegalese region of Casamance. The initiative, dubbed Operation Wula Kokon, is a continuous patrol carried out by soldiers to provide confidence and psychological support to residents of Foni, following clashes between Senegalese forces and MFDC separatives in Casamance, leading to people in Foni fleeing their homes for safety. Lieutenant Colonel Omar Bojang is the commander of the Quick Reaction Forces carrying out the patrols.
We are able to protect some of the animals who were actually, if they are not giving them food or water, they could have gone astray, they would have gone left. But because of the patrols and the standing patrol that we conducted, you can see we are in the Kasu season. So because sometimes people were afraid to get into their farms to pick the Kasus, but we stand there for 2-3 hours to allow them to harvest and later they move, as you had some of these community leaders what they actually said. So the problems, of course, they are there, but at least very minimal. We've got enough support. You can see the new vehicles that have been given by the government.
We are here in Balen, in Fonyi Councillor District, where the confrontation between the Senegalese forces and the MFDC separatists began on January 24, 2022.
We fled twice. The first was when the Senegalese forces chased a truck into Casamance, and they clashed with the MFDC separatives. The second came 2 weeks later, when there was heavy fighting between the two forces. Bullets were selling here, but Bojang and his men were helpful in picking them and assuring us our safety.
We've heard from the Alcalo as well, who explained to us that there is order as of now, and then hopefully the other community members, majority of whom are still away, will be joining them tomorrow from various settlements. We are here between Baipol and Julamfar, and then we can see that this crater here is created by one of the artillery bomb cells that landed here, and it is said that the radius of its destruction can be up to 300 meters plus in upward inside the community where we just left. There are tents that we are provided by government and partners to ensure that the internally displaced people will have proper accommodation until they are able to return to their respective communities. Yes, we are right at the border with Casamance here, just 100 meters from Opad, and then you can see right behind there is a house where the MFDC separatives had their checkpoint. But now we can get confirmation from the commander of the patrol team or the quick reaction forces that they have already evacuated the place.
Yeah, 3 weeks ago they were very active. They were here. We even had an interaction with them, of course, to tell them that you have no business with coming into the Gambia with arms and ammunition. You can come as a normal citizen, which is allowed and is accepted, but you cannot come with arms and ammunition into our country, of which we had an agreement and we discussed. But now you can see they are not there. They have left the place.
At various communities, Alkalolo and community leaders returned gratitude to the government for providing support to the internally displaced people and the deployment of the army to ensure safety of their lives and properties. They, however, appealed for more support, saying they lost some of their livelihoods, such as their cashew plantations and livestock, which they said were affected by blood saline from the conflict. At the end of the patrol, the commander of QRF-1, Lieutenant Colonel Bojang, described the initiative as successful, while the commander of the incoming forces, QRF-3, Lieutenant Colonel Abdullah Jata, assured the people of their commitment to continued peace and stability in the area.
Various villages and communities that we've interacted, you've seen their reaction, and you've heard firsthand some of the impacts that have been done by the patrol team and also the assistance by the government of the Gambia, and also the non-governmental organizations and also the civil society organization and also the local communities, how they were able to support each other.
We are going to continue what they have started. They have taken the shock when it was very hot. And now we are going to follow on their footsteps. We are not here to change anything, and we are here to support our people, the Gambian people, and to make sure that they go back to their normal lives.
The confidence and assurance patrol by officials of the Gambia Armed Forces is expected to provide psychological support to residents of the affected areas by the conflict, and as well limit the economic loss on internally displaced people. Alhaji Mbaye, GRTS News.
3rd of May each year is World Press Freedom Day. The moment is set aside to reflect on the plight and contributions of journalists, as well as remind governments and other stakeholders to respect their commitment to press freedom. The theme for this year's World Press Freedom Day is Journalism under Digital Siege, while Reporters Without Borders have unveiled its RSF's World Press Freedom Index, which states that following the 22-year reign of former President Yahya Jammeh, Gambia has seen considerable progress in terms of press freedom. The crime of defamation was declared unconstitutional in 2018. Attacks on journalists have decreased and new media outlets have been launched. On the country's media landscape, the report states that since President Adama Barrow was inaugurated in December 2016, the state-owned broadcaster lost its monopoly and have radio and television networks, both private and community-based, emerged. Gambia has 33 radio stations, one of which is state-owned, 6 television networks, 5 of which are private, and 4 dailies, the most important being The Point. There are also 3 newspapers that are published 3 times a week. Most Gambians consider the country's media as free and operating without governmental interference. They operate without censorship and they accurately reflect the country's diverse opinions. Nevertheless, the government does at times exert pressure on some media outlets. In early 2020, 2 private radio stations, King FM and Home Digital FM, were suspended for 1 month, and their directors detained for 4 days for inciting hatred after covering political demonstrations organized by opposition parties. On legal framework, a law on access to information was adopted in 2021. This was a historic moment in a country which for the first time recognized information access as a human right. The Supreme Court in 2018 ruled that penalizing defamation was unconstitutional. This was a notable advance, tempered by the fact that draconian media laws passed under Jammeh remain in effect and still carry prison sentences for journalists. Well, time now to take our first break. The news returns in a moment. Do stay. Welcome back, and now we begin the international news in the U.S., where thousands lined the streets to protest the Supreme Court draft ruling overturning abortion rights. Many see it as a violation of women's right to choose, which they say is a fundamental right. More in this France 24 report.
The more you'll realize they're not just themselves, they're human beings.
When birth control failed me, my husband and I made the choice to have a legal abortion. And I'm horrified that that decision would be stripped away from my grandsons and granddaughters.
I think there's a bigger arc, that there's a really aggressive semi-fascist right wing that is moving to take away our rights. They want sexist politicians to decide what women can do with their own bodies.
For more on this, a little earlier I spoke to our Washington correspondent Ketavan Kordestani.
The president, of course, reiterated his belief that a woman's right to choose was a fundamental right. He also, in remarks to a reporter right before making a trip, he spoke to reporters and he said that of equal concern, besides the concern for this attack on abortion rights, was the legal rationale used by the court in that draft opinion. The legal rationale, which basically put aside the right to privacy in the Constitution. And the president said that not only was the right to abortion in jeopardy, but other rights deriving from that right to privacy, for example, like contraception or like gay marriage, and that a series of rights that Americans have come to rely on would be in jeopardy if that legal rationale was applied to its fullest. So the president really defending the rights of women to choose, but also worried about the implications, the further implications of the legal argument behind that decision. The president also, in an earlier statement, a written statement this time, concluded by really pointing to something that is key in this debate. This issue is now going to probably be at the center of the upcoming midterms elections in November. And the president said in the statement that it will fall on voters to elect pro-choice officials this November. He called on voters to turn out to elect more pro-choice representatives in the House, more pro-choice senators, and more pro-choice elected officials in states across the United States when it comes to the election in November, because he said that this is the only way that they are going to fight for women's right to choose here in the United States. The president really slamming the decision of the court, as you said, calling it radical, and he said that he believed in that fundamental right, and that his administration, that is something he said in the statement, that his administration was working to find options to react with whatever comes next, saying that, of course, this is a draft opinion and that it could still change, but the expectation, of course, is that the gist of that opinion and the overturning of Roe versus Wade is just a matter of time, and it will happen in the coming weeks, maybe a couple of months.
Now, European Union chief has called for Russia oil ban in fresh round of sanctions. It's the EU's 6th package of sanctions, and the ban starts now and go for zero within 6 months for crude oil import, and by the end of the year for refined products like diesel. France 24 has more on that again.
The EU is striking at Russia's lucrative energy sector as part of a 6th round of sanctions against the country. Brussels unveiling plans for a ban on all Russian oil imports by the end of the year.
Today, we will propose to ban all Russian oil from Europe. This will be a complete import ban on all Russian oil, seaborne and pipeline, crude and refined. We will make sure that we phase out Russian oil in an orderly fashion.
The goal is to deprive Russia of significant income. 2/3 of its oil exports go to the EU, and Russian oil accounts for 1/3 of the EU's oil imports. Since the invasion of Ukraine, Europe has already paid some 20 billion euros to Russia. But the plan needs to be approved by all member states. In a bid to ease the transition, 2 countries, Hungary and Slovakia, that are heavily reliant on Russian oil, will be allowed to keep their existing energy contracts that go through 2023. The bloc is also taking aim at Russia's banking sector, moving forward with plans to disconnect the country's largest lender from SWIFT, the global financial communication system. Sberbank, which accounts for 37% of the sector, and 2 other large banks are set to be excluded from the network.
This will solidify the complete isolation of the Russian financial sector from the global system.
The oil embargo follows the decision last month to ban Russian coal imports. The move could also pave the way for a possible future ban on Russian natural gas.
Meanwhile, EU says it will significantly increase Moldova military aid as questions emerged about the spillover from Russia-Ukraine war. This as the Russia invasion of Ukraine intensifies.
News for Moldova, as questions endure over a spillover from the war in neighboring Ukraine. On Wednesday, the EU pledged to increase military aid to the country, with Council President Charles Michel declaring full solidarity in the face of potential Russian aggression.
This year, we plan to significantly increase our support to Moldova by providing its armed forces with additional military equipment. We'll also provide support to counter disinformation, strengthen social cohesion, and withstand cyber attacks.
Backed by Michel at a press conference in Chisinau, Moldovan President Maia Sandu renewed her country's commitments to join the European Union, having first applied on March 3rd this year.
The removal of tariffs for Moldovan products and expansion of product categories admitted onto the European market would be of huge support for the entrepreneurs of our country affected by the war.
A questionnaire launching the decision on Moldova's membership is set to be handed over to EU officials in the next few days. It comes as tensions have heightened this past week after a series of explosions in the pro-Russian separatist region of Transnistria, the small strip of land between Moldova and Ukraine. Kyiv believes Moscow intends to destabilize the region and create a pretext for a military intervention, while also aiming to form a land corridor from Russia through southern Ukraine and to Transnistria. For the time being, President Sandu, however, believes there is no further imminent threat of unrest. But the pro-Western leader says contingency plans have still been put in place to prevent further provocation.
Well, that was it, and now a look at our top stories once again. President Adama Barrow has reshuffled his cabinet, appointing former Higher Education Minister Badara Diouf as Vice President, replacing Dr. Aissatou Touré. A move to contain malaria in the Gambia as the Ministry of Health prepares to distribute 2 million bed nets across the country commencing May 8. Reporters Without Borders have hailed the Gambia's considerable progress in press freedom following the launch of new media outlets by President Adama Barrow. This as the country marks World Press Freedom Day. Plus, thousands of people lined up the streets in the U.S. to protest against the Supreme Court's ruling to overturn abortion rights. And European Union chiefs have called on Russia oil ban for fresh round of sanctions. This as the Russia invasion of Ukraine intensifies rather. Well, that was all we had time for in today's edition of GRTS News. From me and the entire news team, we want to thank you for the pleasure of your company. Do stay tuned to GRTS.